But preach with me a little bit. Yeah, I have a message, and I've been a little bit hesitant in how to deliver this message. I really knew that God was asking me to speak on something, and hesitant just because I think that the majority of my Christian walk and my faith and being in ministry. I've been in a certain season, and I've been in a process. And actually, when I was about 19 and I was entering into ministry, I had a prophetic word over my life. And in that prophetic word was that God's taking you into seasons of preparation to get you to where He wants you to be. But that season of preparation is very important. And so, you mean I hope, oh yeah, great, maybe a year, 2 years. Well, a lot longer than that. The process has been a lot longer than that. And that's what I want to speak on today, is that when we are called, there's a process that God takes us through to get us to the destiny that He has for us. And like I spoke last time I was here, I said that each and every one of you is a minister in this place. I want to establish that again. Each and every one of you is a minister. Each and every one of you is in ministry, whether it's in your home, whether it's in your workplaces, whether it's with your family, each and every one, whether it's at school, every place you find yourself, God has established you there, and He's got something for you there, even in the hard ground. And so I get to speak on somebody that I connect with, and that I've loved, and this account actually, I actually hate using the word story for our Bible accounts, because sometimes I think that we get caught up, especially if you've been raised in church. I mean, you're told these when you're young and everything like that, and we get this concept that it was just like somebody wrote the story about the person. But sometimes we forget that this is a real account. This is somebody that lived and died. And this is somebody that God used. They really walked and talked and went through some of these things that happened. And so I'm going to be speaking about Joseph this morning. Anybody ever hear of Joseph? Oh, 3 people. Okay, we got some work to do here. That's good. I'm not going to go into the whole account or read through it. I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit this morning because it's quite a long account. But it's amazing. It's amazing. Here was a young man who was loved by his father, and God had called him apart and separated him for a purpose. And God gave him very specific dreams, and God gave him dreams that showed him ruling over his family. And because of that, his brothers despised him, and even hatred set into their hearts. And here's a young man who, not to his own, not because I've heard people preach that, he must have been pretty arrogant because he went and shared the stories. I don't really buy into that. I don't buy into that because you say you got a dream from God, that means that your brothers have the right to, want to have a hatred to murder you. Right? But there is things that sometimes we don't understand, and we can look back on and be like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or I could have finessed that a little bit better. But that's life. We all have those moments, right? We all have those things that happen. So what happens in this account with Joseph is that here is a young man who his brothers decide and plot to destroy him, to actually take his life. And so they trick him, and right before they're about to murder him, what happens is one brother sticks up for his life, and they decide not to kill him, but they decide to sell him to slavery. So they throw him in a well and they wait for slave traders to come. I was thinking about this. They sell him into slavery, and I was thinking about how it must have been for Joseph on that road when he was marching towards Egypt. I mean, it wasn't like he was in a car. We've got a long trip, and we think like, oh, I got a long trip. 5 hours or whatever like that. But we're in a vehicle. We're driving. Like we got a lot of benefits in our day and age that we can be thankful for. Which I love technology. I love the things that we have. I believe that God is blessing us. And but you got to think about that. What hardship would that have been, marching on desert sands? Here you were beloved by your Father, and now you're in a position where you're beloved by no one. You're absolutely nothing. So, I just wonder, what would it have been like to be on that march? I think some of us would hate God. Yeah, I think some of us would be at that place. It doesn't say that Joseph did. In fact, it's a good thing that he didn't break away and go home, because as difficult as that road was, as painful as that road marched him to his destiny. That road marched him to actually be able to become the vessel used to actually save his family. I want to tell you, there's some roads that you're walking on today that seem to be a road of harm, but God's going to use it to march you to the destiny that He has for your life. And I want you to know that. Sometimes we walk difficult paths, and they're not caused by God, but God uses them to march us to the very thing that He had planned for us and He had destined for us. And so sometimes it's hard in the moment to be able to recognize that, but when we put our full trust in Jesus, when we put our lives in His hand and we say, God, you know what? Your ways are higher than my ways. Your understanding is higher than my understanding. So that in the midst of our difficult situations and circumstances, all of a sudden, we're putting our hope in Him. We now don't have to fight against the road or fight against what we think that, this is wrong, I got to fight against it. No, we don't have to fight against it. We let God battle those things, and we put our hope and our trust in Jesus, and all of a sudden we start embracing the season that we're in. We start to embrace it. And we start to see, okay, I'm going to embrace this season. I'm going to embrace what God wants to do with me. Whatever I can do, I'm going to do it. Even though this season is not something I wanted. Even though this wasn't something I prayed about. I mean, even on that end, I was thinking about it. I mean, I'm thankful that God hasn't answered all the prayers that I prayed. I think that if you've lived a little while and been a believer for a little while, you might agree with me. Thank you, God, that you didn't answer every prayer I prayed. You knew what was better for me than what I knew at times. And but this is the thing, is that marching on that road is going to bring you to the plans that God has for you. Even though the road seems hard, it prepares you for the season He has. So he marched on this road, and he was delivered and sold to Potiphar. And here he is now in a new season completely. Here he was, he went from being a favored son, separated from the hardships and the labors and all that kind of stuff in his home, because his father wanted to raise him up and teach him and all this different kinds of stuff. And this is one of the reasons why the brothers hated him. But in this moment, here he's sold, and now he's not his own person anymore. He's a slave. But yet, it seems that he didn't fight that. It seems that what it says in Scripture is that he kind of embraced it, and he became favored in it, and he actually rose to the top of it, and he actually learned a lot in that season. He learned a lot about how to take care of things. He learned how to rule. This guy Potiphar was the captain of the guard in the temple, or in the palace, and he took care of it. This guy got so reliant on Joseph that he just kind of continued to put more and more in his hands, letting him take it. And I'm sure that this was a moment of kind of like, you can get relieved. You can get like, okay, things have turned around a little bit. You know, I'm not marching on that road anymore. I'm not marching on that desert sand any longer. I mean, things have kind of settled, and now I kind of see what my future is like, and I see what things are happening, and God has favored me in this season. And then all of a sudden, what can happen is everything can change. Somebody makes a decision, and that's exactly what happens here with Joseph. Here is Potiphar's wife who wants Joseph, and Joseph rejects her, and she then lies about him, and Joseph now is taken out of a season where again he found favor, and now he's thrown into a dungeon. He's thrown into a place where they let people rot and die. Probably the most hopeless of places that he could have found himself in. Wow. Yet, for some reason, it doesn't ever tell us that he just laid down and died. Wow. For some reason, even in the midst of this happening again, Joseph seems to embrace the dungeon. Wow. And it's interesting, but he's actually positioned now even closer to the destiny that God had for him. He's now positioned where he's under the palace. He's getting closer and closer to the destiny that God has for him. He's getting closer to fulfilling the dreams that God gave him. And he embraces this season. He embraces these hardships. And he continues to put his faith and his hope in God. And how do we know this? We know this because it says that he gained favor even in the dungeon. It says that he also was using his giftings in these seasons. He was using the things that God had placed in his life, the tools that God had given him, and the things that he had been taught throughout the other seasons, and he was embracing it, and he was being who God had called him to be. So he was who God called him to be when he was at home. He was who God called him to be when he was on that road to Egypt. He was who God called him to be when he was at Potiphar's house. He was who God called him to be in the dungeon. And when the cupbearer and the baker needed dreams to be revealed, Joseph was there, which ultimately led it so that the cupbearer would be there for Pharaoh when Pharaoh needed his dream to be interpreted, which positioned Joseph to be in front of Pharaoh. All of a sudden, he would have had this moment where he would have been called upon, probably not knowing what was going on. And I always picture it this way, and I'm not sure, but I believe that this is probably a good chance that this happened. But he would have been taken, he would have been bathed, he would have been made presentable before Pharaoh, before this. He probably wouldn't even have been told why this was all happening. And he would have been taken before Pharaoh, and he interpreted the dream, and that positioned him as he continued to be who God called him to be. That positioned him to be given a ring that gave him authority over all of Egypt. And that's where I want to stop in this story. There's more to the story. If you are not familiar with Joseph, I want to challenge you. Go and look it up in Genesis this week. It's an awesome account. But I want to challenge us as believers that sometimes the very things that we're asking God to remove from us are the very things that are leading us to God's plan. Yeah. The very things that seemingly are causing pain and hardship in our lives are sometimes the things that are there to actually refine us and teach us to get us to the victory that God has for us. And so what I want to continue to encourage and what I want to continue to do is to be able to encourage us as a body to actually start embracing God through all of these difficulties. Amen. Don't just ask God to remove them, but embrace them and say, God, what's your will through this process? You know, this person at work who is trying to get me fired, what do you want me to do with that person, God? How can I reach that person? How can I reach out to that person? How can I love on that person? How can I do what's right? How can I be faithful with who you called me to be with that person? You know, when we find things that are going on in our lives, we find ourselves on these roads, because we will and we do. In this life, we will find ourselves in hardship. We will find ourselves on roads that are painful. I mean, we've been hearing different stories of how God, in this last season of fall, different stories that have gone on of where people have been sharing as I've been preaching, different stories of hardships that have gone on. Renee talked about her home when she preached, and how God gave her a home, and how you know how it was flooded, and how God kind of restored it to her, and they rebuilt, and everything. You know, there's seasons that we go through, and there's things that sometimes we don't understand why. But we're not always meant to understand why. I'm going to tell you today, we're not always meant to understand why, because we're meant to trust God wholeheartedly with all that we are. Amen. And we're meant to trust that He knows the why. He loves you. Yeah. He knows the why. And so we've got to continue to put our full trust, our full hope in who He is. And that is what leads us through those things. When we buck against sometimes the season that we're in, what we can do is we can find ourselves in a desert for 40 years, like the Israelites did. That's true. Don't prolong a hard season by bucking against it. You know, walk through it with God empowering you so that you actually walk through it in the time frame that God had for you to walk through it. Wow. That's a good word. Because if you don't, you might find yourself going in circles. Going in circles. Going in circles. You will. You do. But God's plan for you is that this would be a short season, that you would walk into it, He will take you through it, and He will march you right through it. It's a short season. And there will be new challenges in every season. But when we trust Him and we wholeheartedly put our faith in Him, and we say, God, you know what? I don't always understand everything. I don't understand why all this is going on. But you know what? I know that you have my best interests at heart. I know that, God, that you're faithful until the very end. Amen. I know that I cannot even be taken from this life unless you allow it. Yes. My hope and my trust is in you. I know that I will march this road, God, because I believe you put me on it. I believe that you're sending me on it. Even if it marches me to my destruction, I'm going to march it. I remember I had a season in my life where I was hearing from God, and it seemed so crazy to me that I just kind of threw up my hands and I kind of said, well, God, I'm going to follow it, because I believe this is what you're speaking to me. I believe this is what you're directing me in. But I'm telling you, God, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to tell you, this is the way I believed I've heard your voice my whole life. And if this doesn't pan out, I'll tell you, I'm not even going to know if I've ever heard your voice. I won't even know if I've ever heard you. I'm going to question everything if this doesn't work. I had to be straight. I'm going to go with this. I'm going to march towards it. If it brings me destruction, I'm not going to know where I'm going to end up. Right? But I was like, but this is what I feel like you're directing me to do. This was in a season where God was transitioning me, and I didn't have a job, and God told me not to go get a job, that He had a ministry for me. And I had a lot of people telling me, oh no, you're not hearing from God, you're not whatever, and a lot of well-meaning believers, but I knew that I heard from God, and so I trusted the Lord, and I said, okay, God, you know what, here I am, you know, a guy's got to eat, he's got to live, he's got to, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and you know what, God was so faithful in that season. God was so faithful in that season. And you know, and even when I went into the next season, the season that He prepared for me, it wasn't the season that I hoped it was going to be. But it was kind of like Potiphar's house. It was kind of like a training ground for me. I got like a really, I learned a lot of new skills. I learned a lot of new things, even though there was difficulties, even though there was other things going on. God taught me a lot of things. And there's those seasons where we learn, and those seasons where God teaches us. But, it was actually a miracle. God told me, so I was actually running a youth ministry. I was connected with the church, and they were, we partnered. They let me use their building for youth ministry. And I had done this for about 2.5 years, where I was actually, kind of paying for this youth ministry and running it. It was something that God told me to start, and so I just set it up, and this church let me use their building and supported it. It supported it through letting me use their building, and so we just continued to run this youth ministry, and for about 2.5 years I ran that youth ministry. Well, when I started it, I was working a full-time job, and so it was very easy to provide for and everything like that. But it was right before the recession hit. And when the recession hit, the company that I worked for a really large company, and they said, we're not going to make any layoffs. They made this statement, we're not going to do any layoffs for a while at all. And about 2 months later, one day, the layoffs came down from head office, and they did a worldwide layoff, where it was like every branch had to, they told you how many people you had to get rid of that day. And I had an awesome boss who fought for my job for hours on the phone with his bosses, but things were solidified, and everything. I just happened to be the newest person on, so it was just one of those things. And then I went into a season where I was out of work, and God was speaking to me that the ministry that I had been running at the time was what He had for me, but He had another ministry for me. And so I was praying into that. I was seeking God. What do you want to do? And I was in a season where I wasn't working. And all of a sudden, near the end of this season of not working, the season where I didn't work, where really God provided for me supernaturally. And I was at a wedding, and I went into just before I hit that, I went into the season where like one of the biggest things that I was lacking, or what I knew that I felt like was a big desire in my heart, was to be mentored. I wanted to be mentored. God kind of called me into ministry, and my plan was to go to Bible school, and God kind of ruined that plan by telling me not to go, and launched me into ministry right away. And so I just kind of stepped into it, but one of the things that I lacked was I really lacked mentorship, and I really wanted somebody that I could trust to mentor me. And so I was in a season where I knew that God was speaking to me of a new ministry, and all of a sudden that I'd be laying this ministry down and taking on a new ministry. At that time, I was really praying. I was continuing to pray. Just God, I just pray for a mentor. I pray for somebody that would be willing to pour into my life. And the reason why I prayed that way was because I had actually asked a lot of people, a lot of different ministers, if they would, and I found that nobody was really that willing. And so I made a decision in my life when I was a young man that's fine. If people don't want to pour into me, that's fine. I'm going to pour into young people. I'm going to pour into youth then. I'm going to be who I feel like I've wanted in my life. But God brought me a mentor, and I was actually at a wedding of a friend of one of the girls that was getting married that had previously went to one of my youth ministries, and all of a sudden, a pastor of one of the churches, the Lord speaks to him and says, that young guy over there is called to be a youth pastor. And so he tells his wife, he says, the Lord told me that guy's called to be a youth pastor. And she looks at him and she says, you don't even know if that guy's saved. She tells him, you don't even know if that guy's saved. And And he said, well, if he's not saved, then I got to go and get him saved, because God told me he's going to be a youth pastor. And I was already doing youth ministry and stuff like that. So he ended up coming over, and he talked to me, and he gave me his card, and he just said, hey, I would like to go over coffee with you. And he was just, he was so awesome about it. We started meeting for coffee, and he's like, I'm not asking you to come to my church. I'm not asking, I just feel like I want to pour into your life. And that's how this mentorship started. And I really honor and respect. His name is Andrew Pickler. And he is a man of faith, and he's traveling the world right now. I think he's in Thailand right now, preaching the gospel and everything. He's retired, but not retired. He'll never retire from the ministry. But God sets us up. There's roads that we walk where we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand why certain things are a certain way. And we've got to understand that sometimes the roads that we're on are not meant for our destruction, but they're meant to bring us to the purpose He has for us. And as we trust Him, and as we continue to put our hope in Him and our faith in Him, and we continue to allow Him to move through our lives, we continue to be faithful in being who we're called to be, no matter what season we find ourselves in. I think it's really key to be who God's called you to be, even in the seasons that seem tough, even in the seasons that seem like everything's working against you. Be who God's called you to be. Be the person that God, don't worry about whether or not that person that should know better is being faithful to what God has for them, or whether or not that person that knows better shouldn't have done this to me or said this to me or whatever. Make sure that your heart and your actions are honoring God. Yeah. And that's something that I've really tried to. I've not always been super or perfect at it. But one of the things that I've always tried to do was that, God, I know that all this is going on. I know this person did this to me. I know that this was wrong and they shouldn't have done this and this wasn't right and that wasn't right. But God, how do I honor you through this situation? How do I walk this situation out where at the end of the day, I can stand before you and know that I did my best in this circumstance. At the end of the day, I know that I walked faithfully. I'm not in control of that person. I'm not in control of that leader, or I'm not in control of that pastor, or that evangelist, or I'm not in control of that other Christian. But I am in control of myself. I am in control of who I am. I am in control of how I respond. I am in control of that. So I got a scripture that I really felt went with this. And again, the guy that I'm talking about that mentored me, he was horrible for following his notes, and I think that rubbed off on my life. It was one of those things. But Proverbs 3:5-6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Amen. And when we trust in God with all of our hearts, our pathways are not winding. They don't go in a circle. They don't loop us in that season. God straightens our paths. And we get to walk through those things. And they get to be in the timings that God had planned them to be. I have more, but I really honestly feel like that is what God wanted to speak this morning. So I'm going to pray, and I'm just going to invite the worship team up as well. But God, I just really want to pray this scripture over each and every one of us. I just pray right now, God, Proverbs 3:5-6. God, that we trust in you, Lord, with all of our hearts. We do not lean on our own understandings, and in all our ways we submit them to you. And you have made our paths straight. I just declare that, God, right now, God, over each and every person, God, here. God, you make our paths straight when we lean not on our understanding, and we trust in you wholeheartedly. I just pray, God, that people in this place would start to recognize some of the paths that they're on, God, and they would they would start to recognize, God, what you're doing through that path. What you're leading them to through that path, God, so that we don't have to resist against where you're leading us, God, but that we could embrace the seasons that we are in and we could follow after you. I pray for that, God. Help us to embrace things, God, that we think, God, that we should be embracing. Help us to embrace people, God, that have wronged us. Help us to love people, God, that have tried to bring destruction to us. And want, God, your path for their lives. And to want your love for their life, God. So, God, I pray in this place right now, God, that over the whole church, the whole body of believers that are here, God, that your kingdom come, your will be done in this place, God, as it is in heaven. Let it happen, God. And help us to embrace those things that we don't understand. But God, but ultimately, they're leading us to you. They're leading us to the destiny that you have for us. In the name of Jesus.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to open up the front for prayer. I just felt moved that we don't have